It is the final conclusion to our series, #Blessed, Happy People in the Kingdom of Happiness. And we talked about early on that this series came right out of some of my experiences in downtown, right? The happiness pursuit that as I talk with people, as I connect with people, and I see people like never before in my life, I'm living around people who are pursuing their dreams, or they're pursuing this passion that they believe is really going to help people and also help them to find happiness. And we said that this series came right out of a lot of the philosophy around downtown. And so the first week we talked about kingdom, and we talked about what does it mean to be in a kingdom, and Jesus' message of returning to the kingdom, and that he was this king in this kingdom, that he would be this good king. We said when Jesus is king, love rules, because Jesus gave this new commandment, and right, only the king of the kingdom can give the commandment. He said, I want you to love each other like I've loved you. And we know that when we look at the life of Jesus and we look into the Bible and see what it has to say about Jesus, one of the dominant characteristics of Jesus and God is love. And so Jesus says, I want you to love people like I love people. And so we see that when Jesus is king, love rules. And we want that to be something that is said of us as a church or individuals. And that's why one of our core values here at Downtown Faith is love loudly. We want to, with everything we have, love people because we believe that Jesus is king. And then we looked at not just kingdom, but then next week we looked at happiness, and we said sustained happiness comes from a rearranged view of happiness. And Jesus gives these things called the Beatitude at the beginning of his most popular sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. Maybe some of you are very familiar with it. If you've been here over the last few weeks, that's what we've been pulling our ideas out of. And Jesus, he gives these 8 Beatitudes, basically these 8 rearranged views of happiness and what it means to be happy and how to pursue happiness. And we saw just some really powerful things to help change our perspective. And we said we don't want to pursue happiness in the wrong direction, right? Like we get to this thing that we think is going to make us happy, and then we find that we've been going the wrong way the whole time, that it's actually over there and it's this rearranged view. And then we continued to talk, and we said happy people love the law of the land but live the law of love. And we looked at how Jesus said that here's the law that you're used to. And he's talking to these people, and because he's got this kingdom message, it's no strange thing that he would bring up law. And there was this law that his people that were used to, and that they were bound to, and that there were people that were putting heavy weights of adding additional laws to the laws that were already given. And Jesus said, what happens when you really follow God, when you really get to the good stuff, is you actually transcend that law. You include it, but you also transcend it. You go beyond it. And that ultimately the law of love, if we can live that well, if we live the law of love right, loving our neighbor as ourselves, that pretty much following all these other laws kind of take care of themselves. And we said the happy people love the law of the land. They include it. It's something that matters. But they live the law of love, which actually just transcends. They don't go by these rules. They go by the idea of I'm going to love people like Jesus loves people. And last week we heard from Jim Dre as he looked into what are we pursuing with our lives. And we looked at the dichotomy that Jesus gives in the Sermon on the Mount between money and kingdom, right? Like, are you pursuing these material things, these things that don't last, that God wants to provide for you, or are you pursuing the kingdom of God? And he said happy people pursue Christ over currency. He also worded it this way, that they pursue mission over money, or purpose over paychecks. And I thought that was so great. It's such a great reminder, because I think we all struggle with the anxiety that comes from worrying about the basic needs of life sometimes, or even our wants in life, the things that we would like to see for our children, for ourselves, for our friends. And we have real anxiety over that. And so Jim Dre's message last week was wonderful. It's a wonderful idea share that happy people pursue Christ over currency. And we looked at what that looks like with the kingdom. And so today we're gonna kind of conclude this series the same way that Jesus actually concludes the Sermon on the Mount, right? So he gets done giving all of this revolutionary teaching, right? Like he's taking things that were very common and he's like flipping them on end. He's giving them this upside down view and perspective of life. He's changing the way that they perceive the world around them, the way they've perceived anything and everything that they've ever learned, right? Like this message, that's why it's so foundational, is that Jesus is changing the game. He's flipping the script. And so we get to the end of Matthew chapter 7, and he's going to kind of end it with this like conclusion. And I think it's a great way for us to end. It's a great conclusion for us to end the series on happiness. And he says this: anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise, right? So there's two parts. There's listen and following of his teaching. And he uses this word wise here. And we see that anyone can be wise. Like he's not saying, like if you believe these certain things about me, you can be wise. No, he's saying if you take the teachings that I've given you and you follow through with them, then you're wise. And anyone can be wise, which is good news for us in case maybe you're not really a church person and this kind of stuff, the religious, maybe spiritual stuff isn't for you. I totally understand. I talk to people like that all the time, and I love having those conversations. And if that's not for you, the good news is you can still be wise. Like Jesus is saying anyone. This is available for anyone, regardless of your belief system. He's saying my teachings have wisdom if you follow through. But I think it's important that we define wisdom. And I think it's this: wisdom is the proper application of acquired knowledge. The proper application of acquired knowledge. It's this. This is my favorite way to say this. Wisdom is knowing that, or knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a fruit salad. Right? Right? There's a difference. And we all know people like this, right? Like that they know the best way. There's this thing. But the idea that applying the truths are very, very difficult. And we know that that is the difficult part. In any life-transforming activity and participating in anything that's going to make you better, the follow-through is the hard part. And so wisdom is that proper application to acquired knowledge. So let's continue to see what he says. Anyone who listens to my teaching and follows it is wise. And then he's going to give us kind of a picture here. He says, like a person who builds a house on solid rock. Though the rain comes in torrents and the floodwaters rise, the winds beat against that house, it won't collapse because it is built on bedrock. Right? Like it's the idea that it has a foundation that can withstand the beating that it's going to take from rains and floods and things like that. Now, here in Las Vegas, we don't get a whole lot of either one of those things, so maybe sometimes that's hard. It's not a great picture for us, but maybe you've lived somewhere, maybe you lived somewhere coastal. Like I grew up in a coastal city, and when hurricanes come through and the floodwaters rise and all those things, you see how damaging it can truly be. And so he says, like wisdom, when you follow through, this wise person, what wisdom does is it provides a firm foundation. But he continues, he's going to contrast it for us. But anyone who hears my teaching and doesn't obey it is foolish. So we see this contrast. So there's this wise person who listens and follows through, and then this foolish person who does not follow through. And basically foolish is this: it's resulting from or showing a lack of sense. Right? It's resulting from a lack of sense, or even just showing a lack of sense. It's like this: my faculties are operating, but it seems as if they're lacking. Right? Like I can perceive the world around me, but it seems as though I can't see the thing that is in front of me. And again, we've all had these moments, right? Whether through innocence or ignorance, there was this thing that we did that we should have perceived it differently, right? Like everyone around us, it was a blind spot in our life. Everyone around us sees that we did this foolish thing, but maybe we didn't realize it until later, until some growth came, until we learned from it and gained wisdom. We've all been there. We've all been this foolish person that seems to be lacking in sense. He goes on, he says, like a person, and again, we're going to get another word picture, like a person who builds a house on sand. When the rains and floods come and the winds beat against that house, it will collapse with a mighty crash. Like, it's beautiful, it's just not reliable or livable, right? Like sandcastles in the sand, they're beautiful, but it's not livable. Does anyone live in a thing like that? No. right? Certainly not by the water, like, right? Which is where most sandcastles are built. He's saying that just practically, when the storms of life come, if you don't have a firm foundation because you've ignored something, you've rejected wise teaching, it's going to collapse. Your life is going to collapse. That direction, that thing that you have put your foundation on is going to collapse because it wasn't something that was wise. And then the author of the gospel here is going to kind of give us a summary of like the people's reaction to his message. Because Jesus is done, right? He's like mic drop, like the sand, boom, done. And then the author is going to give us this reaction. He says, when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teachings, for he taught with real authority, quite unlike their teachers of religious law. And we talked a few weeks ago about their teachers of religious law and how they would interpret and teach the law that was very important to people. But what Jesus did, again, was he transcended what they were doing. He did this other thing, and he taught with authority, right? He taught like I'm gonna give you a new perspective, a better perspective, a bigger, brighter perspective of the things that you've always been taught. And when other teachers of religious law would teach these things, they didn't do it with authority because the authority was God's, not theirs, right? That was their rightful place. But Jesus comes in and he does something different by teaching these new things with authority, saying to people, communicating to people through this, that he was God, that he was the king of this kingdom. And so we see that in this, he concludes the whole thing. And what we want to talk about today is this contrast between the wise and the foolish. And we can learn this. Active follow-through of Jesus' teaching creates firm foundations for life transformation. I think all of life is a process. It's a process. It's a journey, not of destination, but of transformation. We're all growing. Or at least we all know areas of our life where we want to actively be growing. And Jesus is saying here, active follow-through from his teachings is how we're going to create firm foundations for true life change, to grow and to be better and to be the person that we are meant to be, which I'm sure is inside of you all. You have this vision of this self that you're meant to be. And Jesus wants you to get there. We just need firm foundations. So, as we contrast the wise and the foolish, and I wonder if maybe even the listeners, as they hear this little word picture, if they don't think of this entire book of wisdom that was in their scriptures called Proverbs, and where we see wisdom personified, and we see the wise and the foolish contrast. And so I want to read a little bit of that and kind of go through this. It says, wisdom shouts in the streets. She cries in the public square, right? So we see that wisdom is personified as a woman. She calls to the crowds along the main street, to those gathered in front of the city gate. What is she crying out? What is she telling people? What is wisdom saying? How long, you simpletons, will you insist on being simple-minded? How long will you mockers relish your mocking? How long will you fools hate knowledge? Come and listen to my counsel. I'll share my heart with you and make you wise. So we see this passionate calling of, I have something to teach you, something to share with you, and something that you can benefit from. It says, I called you so often, but you wouldn't come. I reached out to you, but you paid no attention. You ignored my advice and rejected the correction I offered. So I will laugh when you are in trouble. So again, this isn't God, this isn't Jesus, this isn't a person, this is wisdom personified. Wisdom basically is going to laugh when trouble comes from the fool who rejected the wisdom. I will mock you when disaster overtakes you, when calamity overtakes you like a storm, when disaster engulfs you like a cyclone, and anguish and distress overwhelm you. Right? So again, we see this storm metaphor here. When they cry for help, I will not answer. Wisdom is saying this, like when the destruction happens based on your own decisions and lack of adherence to wisdom, right? When that happens, there's nothing that wisdom can do in that moment, right? Like it's already begun the destruction. So when cry for help, I will not answer. Though they anxiously search for me, they will not find me, for they hated knowledge and chose not to fear the Lord. They rejected my advice and paid no attention when I corrected them. Therefore, they must eat the bitter fruit of living their own way, choking on their own schemes. Man, I can tell you of time after time after time where I ate the bitter fruit of my own decisions. Where I had to sleep in the bed I made. As one mentor in my life said, that's just what it is. You're going to have to sleep in the bed you made. We've all been there. We've all been that person that just didn't listen to wisdom. Maybe it was in your youth. Maybe you still have this thing that comes up in you that says, I'm going to reject the wisdom around me. You're eating, maybe even today, you're feeling that, yes, I've been eating the bitter fruit of living my own way. For simpletons turn away from me. This is wisdom talking here, to death. Fools are destroyed by their complacency. But all who listen to me live in peace, untroubled by fear of harm. So we see the contrast here is that the between the wise and the foolish, the wise listen, accept, and they get life and peace. They listen, they accept, and they get life and peace. But the foolish ignore and reject, and they get death and anxiety. When it comes to the life-changing, life-giving teachings of Jesus, which may be very new to you, right? But maybe you look at what we've talked about in the series and you go, yeah, that's not my life. That's not the way I'm living. Just ask yourself, am I wise or foolish? When it comes to the teachings of Jesus, am I wise? Am I listening? Am I accepting? Am I experiencing life and peace? Am I experiencing happiness and fullness and joy? Or have I been ignoring it and rejecting it to my own detriment? Instead of peace, do I live with anxiety? Instead of happiness, do I feel this hole and this misery in my life? I think we've all been maybe on both sides of this at different times in our life. And that's the question today. Am I wise or am I foolish? Look at what Father Richard Rohr says. He says, wisdom seeing has always sought to change the seer first and then knows that what is seen will largely takes care of itself. We transform our person, we transform our perspective. And how do we transform our person? Jesus says, by listening, learning the wisdom that he has, and then following it. So it's simply this. Happy people wisely follow Jesus into new life. Life transformation, new life, this process is a following of Jesus because he has wise teachings about the law of love and how to interact and how to be all the things that you really want to be. Jesus has something to say about that, and he lived it for us. And it was recorded for us to look at. And what we see is basically this following of Jesus, the original term wasn't Christian, right? Because Christian has a lot of baggage to it. The term Christian, you may think of that and you're like, get me far away from that, right? Or you may know some Christians and that's why you're like, get me some far away from that, right? Christianity can hold some baggage to it, this system. He's saying, no, I want you to follow me. That's what I want. That's not about this system. That's about this person. That's not about religion. It's about a relationship with Jesus. And that relationship is a follower, or what the term Jesus used and what was used early on when all this was first taking place was disciple. And disciple is a learner, a follower, an adherent, someone who reproduces the teachings of their teacher. It's like this. It's saying, okay, I have this thing going on in my life. How would my teacher, how would this person I'm learning from, how would they live this out? What would they do? What's the wisdom that they would apply to this situation? And then that's what I'm going to do. And I've already made that decision because I am a disciple, right? I've already said that I'm going to adhere to this person's teaching. So I look at it and I go, okay, this is what's going on in my life. What does Jesus have to say about it? From a true follower, a true adherent, a real disciple, not a Christian, a disciple. I say I've already submitted to following whatever Jesus' wisdom is on this. Here's a great way to practically apply that. Yesterday, one of our groups, our financial goals and dreams group, decided to get wisdom from the group, right? From the materials that they're using. They have a curriculum. They have someone who's using wisdom from Jesus and from Proverbs. And one of the things that this wisdom said is the first step is we want you to have a certain amount of money that you can fall back on, right? Like we want you to get to this place where you have money you can fall back on. And so the group said, okay, great. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to practically put that into place. We're going to let that change our life. We've never done this before. We're going to start doing it. And so they said, okay, let's have a yard sale. Let's get rid of things that we don't need, that we don't want anymore, that we don't use anymore. Maybe it was from a different season of life. Let's put it in the yard. Let's put a price tag on it. And let's take that money and let's take this first step towards life transformation as it relates to our finances. And it was wonderful. 4 families were able to raise over $800 in just a few hours of doing this yard sale. You want to talk about some happy people? I got a text yesterday from some happy people, right? Hey, this was money we didn't have, and we got it from things we weren't using, and we were able to put that into the bank. And one of the reasons that most of, if not all of these people that are doing this group, that are participating in this together, one of the reasons why is because they want to be generous givers. But if you don't have, when you consistently live beyond your means, you cannot give generously like you've always dreamed, right? Like I think most people don't want to just give generously. They want to be generous givers. You can't do that if you're not able to handle your finances in a wise way. Well, Jesus, the Bible, has things to say about our finances. And this group is taking practical steps towards life transformation. That's what we're talking about here. It's not some spooky, mystical, spiritual thing. I believe there are those things that are going on inside of us when we do this, but it's super practical steps. And Jesus is saying, hey, if you're either wise or foolish, you take it and you follow it, or you don't. And then the natural outcomes come from that. And our goal here is to help people follow Jesus into a new life, into life change. And I'm so excited for that group and what they were able to experience yesterday and the steps that they're taking. That's what it means to follow Jesus. It's to say, I'm his disciple, I'm his learner. I'm going to submit to his teaching and his wisdom. And my goal throughout this whole series was that people would follow Jesus and they would be happier for it.